What happens when the most peaceful species in the galaxy discovers their children have been taken? What occurs when beings who have never known true war suddenly understand the meaning of absolute fury? The Galactic Council thought humans were just another primitive species, emotional, unpredictable, but ultimately harmless. They catalogued our weaknesses: too attached to offspring, too willing to sacrifice for others, too quick to form bonds with strangers. They were wrong about everything. When the Zephyrian Empire decided to harvest human children for their collection, they expected the usual response: diplomatic protests, economic sanctions, maybe a few skirmishes at the border. What they got instead was something the galaxy had never witnessed before: a species that would burn down the universe itself before allowing harm to come to their young. This is the story of how humanity's greatest weakness became the galaxy's most terrifying strength. This is the tale of what happens when you take the children of a species that loves harder, fights fiercer, and never ever forgives those who threaten their families.
The aliens thought they understood humans.
They were about to learn just how wrong they were. The morning sun cast long shadows across the playground of New Terra Elementary School when the ships appeared. They materialized without warning, sleek crystalline vessels that seemed to bend light around their edges, making them appear almost ethereal against the blue sky. Children stopped mid-swing, their laughter dying in their throats, as massive shadows fell across the monkey bars and slides. Sarah Chen was helping her 6-year-old daughter Emma with her shoelaces when the first beam struck. It was painless, she would later tell the investigators, like being wrapped in warm honey. The paralysis took hold instantly, leaving her conscious but unable to move as crystalline beings emerged from the ships. They stood merely 8 feet tall, their bodies translucent and constantly shifting, like living glass filled with swirling galaxies. The Zephyrians moved with practiced efficiency. They had done this countless times across hundreds of worlds, collecting specimens for their vast museums of living beings. To them, it was art. To them, it was preservation of the galaxy's most interesting creatures. They saw themselves as benefactors, saving these primitive life forms from their inevitable self-destruction. Emma looked up at her mother with wide, confused eyes as one of the beings approached. The creature's voice resonated inside their minds, speaking without words, conveying meaning through pure thought. "Do not fear, small one. You are chosen for something greater." Sarah felt her heart breaking as she watched her daughter being gently lifted into the alien's arms. Emma didn't cry. She was too shocked, too overwhelmed by the strangeness of what was happening. Around the playground, 47 other children were being gathered with the same methodical care. The Zephyrians treated them like precious artifacts, handling them with a reverence that might have been touching if it wasn't so terrifying. "Mummy?" Emma's voice was small, uncertain. "Mommy, I want to go home." The words cut through Sarah like broken glass. She strained against the paralysis beam, every fiber of her being screaming to reach her child, but her body remained frozen in place. Tears streamed down her face as she watched the beings carry the children toward their ships. The lead Zephyrian, distinguished by the deeper blue swirls within its crystalline form, paused near Sarah. Its mental voice was calm, almost apologetic. "Your offspring will be well cared for. They will live in paradise, wanting for nothing. They will be treasured, studied, appreciated. Is this not better than leaving them here to suffer the violence and chaos your species seems to embrace?" Sarah's mind screamed responses she couldn't voice. She wanted to tell this creature about Emma's first steps, about bedtime stories and scraped knees kissed better. She wanted to explain about birthday parties and Christmas mornings, about the way Emma laughed when she was tickled, about how she still crawled into bed during thunderstorms. She wanted to make this being understand that love wasn't about preservation in crystal cages, but about growth and choice and the messy, beautiful chaos of actually living. But the beam held her silent, and the children were loaded onto the ships. The last thing Sarah saw before the ships vanished was Emma's small face pressed against a translucent wall, her hands flat against the surface as she mouthed the word "mummy" over and over again. The paralysis beam released its hold 10 minutes after the ships departed. Parents collapsed to the ground, some screaming, others silent in their shock. Sarah crawled across the playground toward where Emma had been standing, her fingers digging into the sand where her daughter's small sneakers had left impressions. Dr. Marcus Webb, the colony's chief administrator, arrived within the hour. He found a scene that would haunt him for the rest of his life. 48 sets of parents holding children's toys and backpacks, their eyes hollow with a grief so profound it seemed to bend the air around them. "They said the children would be treasured," Sarah whispered when Webb knelt beside her. "They said they'd live in paradise." Webb had seen the reports from other worlds. The Zephyrian Empire's eternal preserve was indeed a paradise of sorts, a vast collection of the galaxy's most interesting species, kept in perfect conditions, studied and admired by beings who saw themselves as the universe's ultimate connoisseurs of life. The subjects lived in comfort, their every need met, their environments crafted to perfection. But they lived in cages. Beautiful, perfect cages. "What do we do?" asked James Morrison, whose twin boys had been among the taken. His wife sat nearby, rocking back and forth, clutching the toy spaceship the boys had been fighting over that morning. Webb activated his communication array and sent out the emergency broadcast that would change everything. The message traveled through hyperspace relay stations, reaching Earth Command within hours, then spreading to every human colony, every ship, every outpost scattered across known space. This is New Terra Colony. 48 children have been taken by the Zephyrian Empire, requesting immediate assistance. Requesting, Webb's voice broke. Requesting everything we have. The response came faster than anyone expected. Within 6 hours, Captain Elena Vasquez of the UES Retribution was ordering her ship to jump to New Terra. Within 12 hours, Admiral Jackson Hayes had declared a state of emergency and begun mobilizing the entire human defense fleet. But it was the civilian response that truly showed what humanity was capable of when their young were threatened. Merchant vessels converted themselves into warships overnight. Miners abandoned their asteroids to join rescue fleets. Scientists dropped their research to work on tracking technology. Even the most pacifist human colonies began sending supplies, money, ships, anything that might help bring the children home.
Doctor.
Amelia Foster, Earth's leading xenopsychologist, was pulled from her university to brief the military commanders. She had studied the Zephyrians for years, had written extensively about their culture and motivations.
EDAG's missing members of nervous system so as an exercise to the comparative nervous system.
They don't see it as kidnapping, she explained to the assembled officers. To them, they're saving these children from what they perceive as a brutal, chaotic existence. They genuinely believe they're doing good. "I don't care what they believe," Admiral Hayes replied, his voice cold as space. "They took our children. That's all I need to know." "Admiral, you have to understand the scope of what we're dealing with. The Zephyrian Empire spans 3,000 star systems. They have weapons that can crack planets, shields that can withstand supernovas. They've never been successfully challenged by any species." Hayes looked at her with eyes that had seen too many battles, too many losses. "Doctor, those other species didn't have one thing we do." "What's that?" "Children to get back." The war planning began immediately. Humanity had never faced an opponent of the Zephyrian Empire's scale and technological superiority. Every military analyst agreed that conventional warfare would be suicide. But as the hours passed and more reports came in from grieving parents, it became clear that conventional thinking wouldn't apply to this situation. Captain Lisa Park of the exploration vessel Horizon sent a message that summed up what everyone was feeling. "My daughter plays violin. She's 7 years old, and she plays violin like an angel. If they think they can put her in a cage and call it paradise, they don't understand the first thing about being human. We're coming for our kids, whatever it takes." The Galactic Council, monitoring human communications, sent diplomatic messages urging calm and negotiation. They offered to mediate, to arrange for visitation rights, to establish communication channels between the children and their families. To them, it seemed like a reasonable compromise. They didn't understand that to humans there was no compromise when it came to their children. On New Terra, Sarah Chen sat in her empty house holding Emma's favorite stuffed rabbit. The toy still smelled like her daughter, that mix of sunshine and playground sand and the strawberry shampoo she insisted on using. Outside, she could hear the sound of ships arriving, volunteers from across human space coming to help in whatever way they could. Her communication device chimed with an incoming message. It was from her sister on Mars. "We're coming, Sarah. The whole family is coming. Uncle Pete's bringing his mining laser. Cousin Jake modified his cargo hauler with missile pods. We're all coming." Similar messages were arriving across New Terra, across all the affected colonies. Humanity was mobilizing not just its military, but its entire civilization. Grandparents were learning to use weapons. Teenagers were volunteering for dangerous missions. Entire families were converting their life savings to fund the rescue operation. The Zephyrians monitoring these communications from their crystal ships were beginning to feel something they rarely experienced: uncertainty. They had observed many species respond to the taking of their young, but nothing like this. Most civilizations sent formal protests and eventually accepted generous compensation. Some launched small military operations that were easily repelled. A few tried terrorism and were swiftly eliminated. But humanity was doing something unprecedented. They weren't just preparing for war, they were preparing for total war. Every human, everywhere, was becoming part of the effort to retrieve their stolen children. General Zyphara, commander of the Zephyrian forces that had conducted the collection, reviewed the intelligence reports with growing unease. These humans were displaying behavior patterns that defied all their models of civilized response. They were acting as if the loss of 48 juveniles was equivalent to an extinction-level threat. "Perhaps we should return the specimens," suggested one of his subordinates. "The disruption to the preserve would be minimal, and it would prevent this overreaction." Zythara's crystalline form pulsed with disdain. "We do not negotiate with primitives. If they wish to throw themselves against our defenses, let them learn the price of challenging a superior civilization." But even as he spoke, reports were coming in from across the galaxy. Human ships were moving, more than their scouts had ever detected. Hidden manufacturing facilities were coming online. Weapons that shouldn't have existed were being deployed. The humans weren't just angry. They were revealing capabilities that had been carefully hidden from galactic view. Ships emerged from asteroid belts where none had been detected. Manufacturing facilities that had masqueraded as mining operations began producing military equipment at impossible rates. Research stations that claimed to study agriculture were suddenly deploying weapons technology that challenged Zephyrian shields. For the first time in millennia, the Zephyrian Empire faced an enemy that truly didn't care about the odds, an enemy that would sacrifice everything for their young. An enemy that loved harder than the Zephyrians had thought possible. The war was about to begin, and neither side truly understood what they were about to unleash. But on New Terra, in an empty house that still smelled like strawberry shampoo, Sarah Chen looked at her daughter's stuffed rabbit and made a promise that would echo across the galaxy. "Mommy's coming, Emma. No matter what it takes, Mommy's coming." The UES Retribution dropped out of hyperspace 3 days later, its hull scarred from years of frontier patrol duty. Captain Elena Vasquez stood on the bridge, studying the tactical displays that showed the impossible task ahead. 48 children. Somewhere in an empire spanning 3,000 star systems. It should have been hopeless. But Elena had been a mother before she'd been a captain. Her own son was grown now, serving on a research station near the Galactic Rim, but she remembered the fierce protectiveness that had consumed her when he was young. She understood exactly why Admiral Hayes had sent her ship first, ahead of the main fleet that was still mobilizing. "Captain," her science officer, Lieutenant Commander Sarah Kim, called from her station. "We're detecting massive energy signatures throughout the system." "The colonists have been busy," Elena nodded grimly. In the 3 days since the taking, New Terra had transformed from a peaceful agricultural colony into something resembling a fortress. Mining equipment had been converted into planetary defense guns. Cargo haulers had been fitted with missile pods and shield generators. Even the orbital grain elevators had been weaponized, their magnetic launching systems repurposed to fire kinetic projectiles. "They know they can't stop a real Zephyrian assault," Elena murmured, "but they're going to make the bastards pay for every meter." Dr. Marcus Webb contacted them as soon as they achieved orbit. His face on the view screen showed a man who had aged years in mere days, but his voice was steady. "Captain Vasquez, thank God you're here. We've had developments." Elena felt her heart skip. "The children? No word on their location yet, but we've had contact. The Zephyrians sent an emissary." An hour later, Elena stood in the colony's makeshift command center, studying the recording of the alien diplomat. The being was different from the crystalline soldiers who had taken the children, smaller, more refined, with gentle silver patterns swirling through its translucent form. "I am Harmonizer Vethal of the Eternal Preserve." The creature's mental voice resonated through the speakers. "I come bearing greetings from the Great Collection, and an offer of understanding between our peoples." Webb's recorded voice responded with barely controlled fury. "You want understanding? Return our children. Your offspring are safe and cherished. They have been given the greatest gift possible, eternal preservation in perfect conditions. They will never know hunger, never know fear, never know the violence that seems to define your species. Is this not what any parent would want for their young?" Elena paused the recording. How did Webb respond to that? "See for yourself," Webb said, restarting the playback. On screen, Webb's face had gone very calm, very still. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of every grieving parent on New Terra. "You have no idea what you've done. You think you understand humans, But you've made the same mistake every predator makes when they attack a human family. You've assumed our love makes us weak. The alien's form had shimmered with what might have been confusion. Your emotional attachment to offspring is indeed a primitive trait that most advanced species outgrow. But we do not judge, we simply preserve. You're not preserving them, Webb had replied. You're stealing their futures. Every scraped knee they'll never get, every birthday party they'll miss, every moment of growth and discovery you've taken from them. You think you're giving them paradise, but you're giving them death in all the ways that matter. The harmonizer's response had been almost pitying. Your species clings to chaos and calls it life. We offer order, beauty, perfection. Your offspring will be studied by the greatest minds in the galaxy, admired for their unique qualities, treasured beyond measure. Treasured like objects, Webb had snarled. Not loved like children. Elena stopped the recording again. She had seen enough diplomatic exchanges to know when talking was pointless. Did they make any concrete offers? Visitation rights, communication privileges. They even offered to take entire families if we agreed to join the collection voluntarily. Webb's laugh was bitter. They genuinely seemed to think we'd consider it generous. And your response? I told them to go to hell, but more diplomatically. Elena nodded approvingly. Any indication where the children might be held? That's where things get interesting. Webb activated a holographic display showing local space. Our deep space monitors detected something unusual. After the diplomatic ship left, we picked up a transmission burst aimed at the galactic core. High energy, heavily encrypted, but the destination coordinates were clear. Elena studied the star charts. The transmission had been aimed at a system called Bethera Prime, deep in the heart of Zephyrian space. It would take months for a conventional ship to reach it, and that was if they could somehow fight their way through the most heavily defended region in the galaxy. Captain, Lieutenant Commander Kim's voice crackled through her communicator. You need to get back to the ship. We're receiving priority communications from across human space. Back on the Retribution, Elena found her communication center buzzing with activity. Messages were coming in from every corner of human civilization. But it wasn't the chaos she'd expected. It was coordination on a scale she'd never witnessed. Report, she ordered. Kim pulled up the display. It's incredible, Captain. Within 72 hours of the news breaking, we've had complete civilian mobilization. Every major corporation, every colonial government, every independent operator has committed resources. The numbers scrolling across the screen were staggering. Prometheus Industries had converted their entire merchant fleet to military specifications overnight. The Mars shipyards had increased production by 300% and was offering ships at cost. Even the traditionally pacifist colonies of the Centauri Collective had begun manufacturing weapons. There's more, Kim continued. We're getting reports of previously unknown human assets throughout the galaxy. Black sites, hidden research facilities, secret ship caches. Apparently, our government has been preparing for something like this for decades. Elena felt a chill. She had always suspected humanity's expansion across the galaxy had been more organized than it appeared, but this was beyond anything she had imagined. What kind of assets? Stealth reconnaissance networks throughout Zephyrian space, weapons research that violates about half the galactic treaties we've signed, and something called Project Lighthouse that's so classified they're not telling us what it is over open channels. A new transmission came through from Admiral Hayes. His image appeared on the main screen, but he looked different, harder, more focused. Behind him, Elena could see the command center of the flagship Indomitable, but it had been expanded far beyond its usual capacity. New consoles, new personnel, new equipment she didn't recognize. Captain Vasquez, Hayes began without preamble. I'm authorizing Operation Homecoming. You're to proceed to Rendezvous Point Tango 7 and assume command of Task Force Retribution. Elena blinked. Task forces were usually composed of a dozen ships at most. Sir, what's the composition of Task Force Retribution? A's smile was grim. Everything we have, Captain, and quite a bit the galaxy didn't know we had. The journey to Rendezvous Point Tango 7 took 18 hours, but Elena spent most of that time reviewing intelligence reports that painted an increasingly disturbing picture. The Zephyrian Empire wasn't just vast and powerful, it was ancient and complacent. They had ruled their corner of the galaxy for over 50,000 years, collecting species like trophies, maintaining order through overwhelming superiority. But their very success had made them predictable. They hadn't faced a real challenge in millennia. Their military was designed to overwhelm primitive species, not fight a war against an opponent with comparable technology and desperate motivation. Dr. Foster had been right about one thing. The Zephyrians genuinely believed they were benevolent preservationists. That philosophical blindness might be exploitable. When the Retribution dropped out of hyperspace at Tango 7, Elena almost didn't believe what she was seeing. The empty system that should have contained nothing but a few barren asteroids was filled with ships. Not dozens. Hundreds. Not just military vessels, but converted civilian craft, hastily armed merchant ships, even luxury yachts fitted with military-grade weapons systems. My God, Kim breathed from her station. Where did they all come from? Elena activated the command channel. All vessels, this is Captain Vasquez, aboard UES Retribution. Requesting fleet status. The responses came in waves. Military ships she recognized, destroyers, cruisers, the massive bulk of 3 dreadnoughts. But most of the fleet was composed of volunteers, civilians who had dropped everything to join the hunt for humanity's stolen children. The converted ore hauler Defiant Hope reported in with mining lasers that could cut through ship hulls. The luxury liner Paradise Lost had somehow acquired enough firepower to level a city. Even tiny courier ships had been fitted with suicide bomber packages, their crews prepared to ram Zephyrian vessels if necessary. Admiral Hayes' transmission reached her an hour later. Captain, I'm promoting you to Task Force Commander with temporary flag rank. Your mission is simple. Find our children and bring them home. Rules of engagement are unrestricted. Use any means necessary. Elena understood what he wasn't saying. The gloves were off. This wasn't a police action or a diplomatic mission. This was a rescue operation with no limits, no treaties to honor, no restraints except success. Sir, what about the Galactic Council? They'll try to intervene. Let them try, Hayes replied coldly. The Council has been notified that human space is temporarily closed to all non-essential traffic. Any interference with our operations will be considered an act of war. Elena felt her breath catch. Humanity was essentially declaring war on the galaxy's primary peacekeeping body. The political ramifications would be catastrophic, but as she thought about those 48 children in crystal cages, she found she didn't care about politics. Her first officer, Commander James Rodriguez, approached with a data pad. Admiral, we've received reconnaissance data from unofficial sources, deep penetration surveys of Zephyrian space going back decades. Whoever gathered this intelligence has been planning for something like this. Elena studied the data. The information was incredibly detailed. Fleet positions, manufacturing centers, population distributions, even cultural analysis of individual Zephyrian commanders. This wasn't the work of casual observers. This was the product of a vast, patient intelligence operation. Commander, get me a secure channel to all ship commanders. It's time they understood what we're really dealing with. An hour later, Elena stood before a holographic conference of over 300 ship captains. Military officers sat beside civilian volunteers, corporate executives next to asteroid miners. What united them all was the same grim determination she felt in her own chest. Ladies and gentlemen, she began, I'm going to tell you something that will fundamentally change how you see humanity's place in the galaxy. For the past 60 years, since our first contact with alien civilizations, we've been preparing for this moment. Not this specific crisis, but the day when someone would threaten our families. She activated the intelligence displays. What you're seeing is the result of Project Umbrella, a black program designed to ensure that humanity would never be helpless in the face of galactic powers. Every human ship that's ever entered alien space has been gathering intelligence. Every diplomatic mission has included covert operatives. Every trade agreement has hidden military applications. The assembled captains stared at star charts showing hidden human assets throughout the galaxy. Listing posts disguised as research stations. Weapons caches hidden in asteroid belts. Even sleeper agents among other species. The galaxy thinks we're naive newcomers stumbling through space, Elena continued. They see our emotional attachments, our chaotic politics, our seemingly disorganized expansion, and they assume we're harmless. They were wrong. Captain Sarah Martinez of the merchant vessel Second Chance raised her hand. Admiral, are you saying we've been planning to fight the Zephyrians specifically? No, Captain. We've been planning to fight anyone who threatened our children. The Zephyrians just happened to be the first ones stupid enough to test us. Elena brought up tactical displays showing the route to Vethara Prime. Intelligence suggests the children are being held at the Eternal Preserve on Vethara Prime. It's the most heavily defended system in Zephyrian space. Conventional assault would be suicide. She smiled. And several captains later said it was the most terrifying expression they'd ever seen on a human face. Fortunately, we're not going to assault it conventionally.
We're going to do something the Zephyrians have never encountered in 50,000 years of galactic dominance.
We're going to make them afraid. The plan Elena outlined was ambitious to the point of madness. Task Force Retribution would split into 12 smaller groups, each targeting different Zephyrian systems simultaneously. Not the major defensive positions, but the soft targets, research stations, cultural centers, civilian installations, places where the Zephyrian elite kept their most precious collections. We're not going to destroy them, Elena explained. We're going to liberate them. Every species they preserved over the millennia, we're going to free. Every collection they treasure, we're going to scatter to the wind. We're going to teach them what it feels like to have their children taken. The genius of the plan was its psychological targeting. The Zephyrians had spent 50,000 years building their great collection. It was their pride, their purpose, their identity. Threatening it would be like threatening their souls. While they're rushing to protect their precious collections, Elena concluded, a small team will infiltrate Vethara Prime and rescue our children. By the time they realize what's happening, we'll be gone. Captain Rodriguez leaned close to her after the conference ended. Admiral, this plan requires perfect coordination across thousands of light years. One mistake, one delayed transmission, and the entire operation fails. Alane nodded. That's why we're not relying on traditional communications.
Project Lighthouse is going active. Rodriguez's eyes widened. He had heard rumors about Lighthouse, whispered speculation about quantum entanglement networks that could provide instantaneous communication across any distance.
If humanity had actually developed that technology, James, get word to all task force commanders. We jumped in 6 hours. And send a message back to Admiral Hayes. What should I tell him? Elena looked out at the assembled fleet. Hundreds of ships crewed by volunteers who had dropped everything to rescue children they'd never met. Miners and merchants, scientists and soldiers, all united by the simple understanding that some lines could never be crossed. Tell him the hunt begins now. The first strike hit the Zephyrian Cultural Archive at Thessera Minor at exactly 0800 Galactic Standard Time. The installation had existed for 12,000 years, housing the preserved remains and cultural artifacts of 300 extinct species. It had never been attacked, never been threatened, never even been approached by hostile forces. Captain Sarah Martinez guided the converted merchant vessel's second chance through the archive's outer perimeter, as if she were making a routine supply delivery. The Zephyrian guards, crystalline beings who had spent centuries in peaceful contemplation of their charges, didn't even raise shields until Martinez's mining lasers began cutting through the habitat domes. All vessels, this is Angel 1, Martinez broadcast on the encrypted human frequency. The hen house is open. Repeat, the hen house is open. Across 12 star systems, 11 other human task groups received the signal and began their own assaults. The Preserve of Eternal Moments at Cathara Station. The Gallery of Final Breaths on Veltar IV. The Museum of Lost Songs orbiting Zephyrian Prime itself. Each installation represented millennia of careful collection, species preserved at the moment of their extinction, cultures frozen in crystalline perfection. The humans didn't destroy them. They liberated them. At Thessera Minor, Martinez watched through her viewports as the habitat domes cracked open like eggs. Inside, she could see movement. Creatures thought extinct awakening from their preservation chambers, artificial environments collapsing as their containment fields failed. A species of blue-furred quadrupeds that had been extinct for 8,000 years stumbled into open space, their preservation pods failing. Second chance to all vessels, Martinez called. We have living specimens in the debris field. Activating emergency rescue protocols. This was the part of the plan that had required the most preparation. Humanity's hidden assets had spent months infiltrating the Zephyrian preservation systems, learning how to safely revive species that had been in stasis for millennia. It was dangerous work. Many of the subjects might die in the transition, but it was better than leaving them in crystal cages forever. The blue-furred creatures were quickly gathered into life support pods and transferred to habitat ships that had been standing by in the outer system. Similar rescues were taking place across all 12 target systems as humanity systematically dismantled 50,000 years of Zephyrian collecting. On Vetera Prime, deep in the heart of the Zephyrian Empire, General Zythara received the first reports with disbelief that quickly turned to rage. His crystalline form pulsed with angry red light as he processed the impossible news. They're attacking our cultural centers? His mental voice cracked like breaking glass. Not our military installations, not our industrial worlds, but our preserves? His aide, a smaller Zephyrian named Sithel, projected tactical displays that showed the scope of the assault. 12 simultaneous strikes, General. They seem to know exactly which installations house our most valuable specimens. This level of intelligence suggests long-term infiltration. Scythara studied the reports. The humans weren't just attacking randomly, they were targeting the Empire's most precious collections with surgical precision. The Gallery of Final Breaths alone contained the death moment preserved consciousness of over 50 extinct species. It was irreplaceable. Scramble the defense fleets, he ordered. Protect the major collections at any cost. But that was exactly what the humans were counting on. As Zephyrian warships rushed to defend their cultural treasures, Admiral Elena Vasquez led her personal strike team toward the true target. The Retribution, accompanied by only 5 other ships, approached Vithara Prime along a route that should have been impossible to navigate. Project Lighthouse is performing beyond specifications, reported Lieutenant Commander Kim. We're receiving real-time intelligence from assets throughout the system. The children are definitely here. Elena studied the tactical display. Vithara Prime was a crystalline world, its surface covered by vast domes that housed the Empire's greatest treasures. The Eternal Preserve sat at the planet's north pole, a massive complex that contained the living specimens the Zephyrians considered their masterwork. Signal the diversion fleets, Elena ordered. Tell them to increase the pressure. I want every Zephyrian ship in the galaxy focused on protecting their collections. The diversion was working better than expected. Throughout Zephyrian space, panic was spreading as reports came in of ancient preserves being opened, priceless specimens being freed, millennia of careful collecting work being undone in hours. The Zephyrian command structure, designed for maintaining order rather than fighting wars, was collapsing under the psychological pressure. At the Museum of Lost Songs, Captain Rodriguez of the destroyer Nightfall was personally overseeing the revival of a species called the Melodians, beings of pure sound who had been extinct for 15,000 years. Their crystalline prison was designed to preserve the exact frequency patterns that comprised their consciousness. Careful with the resonance dampers, he called to his technical team. If we get the frequency wrong, we might kill them permanently. The process was delicate, requiring precise manipulation of harmonic fields that most humans barely understood. But humanity's hidden research programs had spent decades preparing for this moment, learning to speak the language of Zephyrian preservation technology. The first Melodian consciousness awakened with a sound like crystal bells singing in harmony. Others followed, their voices joining in a chord that spoke of joy and confusion and desperate gratitude. They had been aware during their imprisonment, conscious but unable to act, watching the universe pass by through crystal walls. "My God," whispered Dr. Emily Chen, the xenobiologist leading the revival effort. "They're trying to say thank you." Similar scenes were playing out across 12 star systems as humanity freed species that had been thought lost forever. The psychological impact on the Zephyrians was devastating. Their entire worldview was built around the concept of preservation as the highest form of love. To see their precious collections scattered, their careful work undone, their preserved subjects fleeing into the void. It was like watching their children die. But the humans weren't done. Elena's strike team reached Vithara Prime as the planet's defenses were in chaos. Half the system's fleet had been recalled to protect threatened collections elsewhere. The remaining ships were focused on the major cities, leaving the polar regions relatively undefended. "Stealth systems are holding," reported Commander Park from her position at Tactical. "But we'll only have minutes once we break atmosphere. The moment we open fire, every Zephyrian in the system will know we're here." Elena nodded grimly. The plan required split-second timing. Her team would have to penetrate the Eternal Preserve, locate the human children among thousands of preserved specimens, and extract them before the Zephyrian response could mobilize. "Dr. Foster, are you ready?" Amelia Foster, the xenopsychologist who had become humanity's leading expert on Zephyrian culture, checked her equipment one final time. She would be leading the ground team into the preserve itself, using her knowledge of Zephyrian psychology to navigate their security systems. "As ready as anyone can be for breaking into the galaxy's most secure prison," she replied. The Retribution descended through Vithara Prime's crystal atmosphere like a falling star. The planet's beauty was undeniable. Vast spires of living crystal that sang in harmony with the solar wind. Gardens where light itself seemed to grow like flowers. It was paradise, if you didn't mind living in a cage. The Eternal Preserve rose from the polar ice like a mountain of pure diamond. Its faceted walls contained thousands of habitat chambers, each one a perfect environment for a different species. Some held individual specimens, others entire populations. All were prisoners, no matter how comfortable their cells. There, Foster pointed to a section near the preserve's base. Human-compatible environmental readings. That's where they'll be holding our children. Elena felt her heart racing. After days of careful planning and coordinated attacks across the galaxy, they were finally close to their real objective. 48 children who should be home playing in sandboxes and learning to read, not becoming exhibits in some cosmic zoo. The ground team deployed as the Retribution's weapons began their assault on the Preserve's shields. Eleanor led 12 Marines in powered armor, while Foster guided them through the installation's labyrinthine passages. Behind them, the ship's guns painted the night sky with plasma fire. The Preserve's interior was even more beautiful and disturbing than Elena had expected. Corridors of living crystal pulsed with bioluminescent patterns, while habitat chambers stretched into the distance like windows into 1,000 different worlds. She could see creatures she couldn't identify, landscapes that defied description, entire ecosystems preserved in perfect stasis. "This way," Foster called, following readings from her scanner. "The human signatures are deeper in the complex." They encountered their first Zephyrian guard at a junction between habitat levels. The crystalline being moved with liquid grace, its form shifting from translucent to opaque as it prepared to defend its charges. It spoke directly into their minds, its mental voice filled with confusion and genuine hurt. "Why do you destroy beauty? Why do you choose chaos over perfection?" Elena's response came through her armor's external speakers, her voice cold and hard. "Because perfection without choice isn't beauty, it's death." The firefight was brief but intense. Zephyrian weapons fired, beams of crystallized energy that could turn matter into frozen sculptures. Human weapons responded with plasma and kinetic rounds that shattered crystal armor into glittering dust. The guard fell, its form fragmenting into 1,000 rainbow shards. "Human signatures are just ahead," Foster reported, her scanner painting targets in the darkness. They found the children in a circular chamber designed to look like a perfect playground. The environment was flawless. Soft grass that never needed cutting, trees that bore fruit year-round, sky that showed the most beautiful sunsets from Earth's history. It was paradise, except for the walls of crystal that made it a cage. Elena's heart broke as she saw them. 48 children, ranging in age from 5 to 12, playing games and exploring their beautiful prison. They looked healthy, well-fed, cared for, but their eyes held a haunted quality that spoke of dreams about home, about families they missed, about a life beyond crystal walls. Emma Chen, Sarah's 6-year-old daughter, was the first to spot the humans breaking through the preserve walls. She looked up from the flower she'd been examining, and her face lit up with hope and disbelief. "Mummy," she whispered. Then louder, "Mummy!" Elena's voice cracked as she activated her external speakers. "Not quite, sweetheart. But we're here to take you home to Mummy." The children's reaction was everything Elena had hoped for and feared. Joy and relief warred with confusion, and the Stockholm Syndrome that came from weeks in captivity, no matter how gilded the cage. Some of the children ran towards the rescuers immediately. Others hung back, uncertain, conditioned by their captors to see the outside world as dangerous. "It's okay," Elena called to them, removing her helmet so they could see her face. "We're humans, like you. We've come to take you home." The extraction process should have taken minutes, but Elena found herself dealing with children who had been told repeatedly that their families had abandoned them, that the preserve was the only safe place in the universe. The Zephyrian psychological conditioning was sophisticated and cruel. "My daddy's really coming for me?" asked Tommy Martinez, one of the twins whose father had been at New Terra's playground that terrible morning. "Your daddy's been looking for you every day since you disappeared," Elena assured him. "Your whole family has. We all have." Behind them, alarms began sounding throughout the preserve. The Zephyrian response was finally mobilizing, and Elena could hear the thunder of approaching ships. "Time to go," she called to her team. "Everyone grab a child. We're leaving now." The withdrawal was harrowing. Zephyrian guards materialized throughout the preserve, their crystalline forms blocking corridors and habitat chambers. But humanity's assault had awakened something in the other prisoners as well. Across the preserve, species that had been dormant for millennia began breaking out of their own cages. The Melodians Elena's forces had freed at the Museum of Lost Songs were broadcasting on frequencies that resonated through crystal structures, weakening the preserve's containment systems. The blue-furred quadrupeds from Thissera Minor had somehow communicated with others of their kind, triggering a coordinated escape attempt. "The whole preserve is coming apart," Foster reported as they reached the Retribution's landing bay. "Every species we've freed is helping to free others. It's like a chain reaction." Elena strapped herself into the command chair as the ship lifted off, 48 human children secured in the passenger compartments. Around them, the eternal preserve was dissolving into chaos as 50,000 years of collected specimens fought for their freedom. Admiral, Commander Park called from Tactical. We're getting reports from all diversion teams. Every target is secured, every collection is being liberated. But Zephyrian response fleets are converging on our position. Elena smiled grimly. The next phase of the plan was about to begin, the part where humanity showed the galaxy what happened to species that threatened their children. Signal all task forces, she ordered. Operation Homecoming is complete. Time to go home. But as the human fleet began its withdrawal, something unprecedented happened. The liberated species didn't scatter to their homeworlds or hide in the depths of space. Instead, they began following the human ships, their various vessels and escape pods forming an impromptu convoy. The Melodians sang songs of gratitude that could be heard across solar systems. The blue-furred quadrupeds transmitted mathematical equations that spelled out "thank you" in 1,000 different languages. Even species that had no way to communicate with humans found ways to express their appreciation. Humanity had come to rescue their own children, but they were leaving with something far more valuable: the friendship and loyalty of dozens of species that had thought freedom was impossible. General Zithara, surveying the wreckage of his empire's most precious collections, felt something he had never experienced in his 1,000 years of existence: fear. Not fear of death or defeat, but fear of a species that could love so fiercely they would fight the entire galaxy for their young. "Sir," his aide reported, "we're receiving a transmission from the human fleet. They're requesting a parley." Scythara's form pulsed with confusion. "They want to talk? After destroying 50,000 years of our work?" The human transmission was brief and delivered by Admiral Elena Vasquez herself. Her image appeared on the command center's main screen, and her words would echo through Zephyrian space for generations to come. "General Zithara, you took out children thinking we would respond like every other species you've encountered. You were wrong. We've shown you what happens when you threaten human families. Now we're going to show you what happens when you give them back." The transmission ended and the human fleet disappeared into hyperspace, taking their rescued children and their new alien allies with them. Behind them, they left the Zephyrian Empire in chaos, its collection scattered, its worldview shattered, its confidence broken. But Elena's final words suggested that humanity's response to the crisis was far from over. The Zephyrians had started something when they took 48 human children. Now they were about to learn how it would end. The reunion on New Terra was unlike anything the galaxy had ever witnessed. Parents who had spent weeks in agonizing uncertainty held their children with desperate intensity, while 48 young voices told stories of crystal cages and alien captors who genuinely believed they were providing paradise. Sarah Chen found Emma in the medical bay, where Dr. Foster was conducting gentle psychological evaluations of the rescued children. The little girl was sitting on an examination table, kicking her feet and telling the doctor about the pretty light people who had kept her in their magic house. "They said Mommy didn't want me anymore," Emma said matter-of-factly, with the devastating honesty of childhood. "They said the sparkly place was better because I'd never get hurt or sad." Sarah felt her heart shatter and rebuild itself simultaneously. She knelt beside the table and took her daughter's small hands in hers. "Emma, sweetheart, Mummy never stopped wanting you. Not for 1 second. I love you more than all the stars in the sky." Emma studied her mother's face with the serious expression children wear when they're processing something important. "The light people said love makes things hurt. They said they were protecting me from hurt." "Oh, baby," Sarah whispered, pulling Emma into her arms. "Love does sometimes hurt, but that's what makes it real. The hurt means it matters." Similar conversations were happening throughout the colony as 48 families began the long process of healing from trauma that had touched every human in known space. But even as the personal reunions continued, larger forces were mobilizing for what everyone knew would be the final confrontation with the Zephyrian Empire. Admiral Hayes arrived on New Terra 3 days after the rescue, accompanied by a fleet that dwarfed anything humanity had previously assembled. But more significant than the ships were the passengers they carried, representatives from every species humanity had liberated from Zephyrian collections. The Melodians had constructed a special resonance chamber that allowed them to communicate directly with humans through harmonic translation. The blue-furred quadrupeds, who called themselves the Kythera, had developed rapid learning protocols that let them master human languages within hours. Even more exotic species had found ways to express their gratitude and their desire to stand with humanity against their former captors. Amelia Foster found herself serving as humanity's chief xenodiplomat, a role she had never expected but was uniquely qualified for. She stood before an assembly that would have been impossible just days earlier. Dozens of species thought extinct, now working together to determine the future of galactic civilization. The Zephyrians aren't evil. she explained to the mixed assembly of human military leaders and liberated species. They genuinely believe they're preserving beauty and preventing suffering. But their method requires removing choice, free will, the very things that make life worth living. The Kithara representative, a being named Veltara, whose blue fur shifted through complex patterns when she spoke, projected her thoughts through the translation matrix. For 8,000 years we watched our children grow old and die in crystal boxes. We felt every moment of their lives passing without growth, without choice, without the chaos that makes existence meaningful. The Crystal Singers believed this was kindness. Admiral Hayes studied the intelligence reports spread before him. The Zephyrian Empire was in chaos, their fleet scattered across thousands of systems trying to protect their remaining collections. But they were also mobilizing for what appeared to be a massive counterattack against human space. General Zythera has declared what he calls a purification campaign, Hayes reported. Intelligence suggests they're planning to eliminate humanity entirely rather than risk further contamination of their collections. Elena Vasquez, still wearing the temporary flag insignia of Task Force Commander, looked around the room at the assembled representatives. Then we have a choice to make. Do we defend ourselves and hope they leave us alone, or do we finish what they started? The debate that followed would shape the future of galactic civilization. Some argued for defensive action, maintaining that humanity had achieved its objective of rescuing their children and freeing enslaved species. Others pointed out that the Zephyrian Empire would never stop seeing free-willed beings as a threat to their ordered universe. It was Emma Chen who provided the deciding argument, though she never knew it. Dr. Foster had recorded some of the children's debriefing sessions, and she played one particular segment for the assembled leaders. Emma's voice, small and earnest, filled the room. The light people showed me pictures of other kids from other places. Lots and lots of kids in pretty boxes. They said all the kids were safe now, but they looked so sad. I asked why they couldn't go home too, and the light people said their homes were gone. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. The Zephyrian Empire didn't just collect species on the verge of extinction, they often caused those extinctions through their interference. Entire civilizations had been destroyed or abandoned to decay, while their finest specimens were preserved in crystal tombs.
How many?
Asked Captain Martinez, her voice barely a whisper. How many species had they collected over 50,000 years? Foster pulled up the data they had gathered during their raids. Conservative estimates suggest over 10,000 species, some extinct when collected, others made extinct by the collection process. The weight of genocide on such an unimaginable scale settled over the assembly like a shroud. The Zephyrians hadn't just been kidnapping individuals, they had been systematically destroying the diversity of galactic civilization while convincing themselves they were preserving it. Veltara's fur patterns shifted to deep purple, indicating profound sorrow in Kithara communication. Our world still exists, but it is empty. The Crystal Singers took our children and told us we were too violent to raise them properly. When we protested, they left us to die alone. Admiral Hayes made the decision that would echo through galactic history. Operation Homecoming is expanded. Our objective is no longer just protecting human interests. It's liberating every species held in Zephyrian collections and ensuring this never happens again.
But even as the expanded alliance prepared for war, something unexpected was happening in the highest levels of Zephyrian society.
The psychological impact of losing their precious collections was causing cracks in their civilization that had been stable for millennia. Harmonizer Vethel, the diplomatic representative who had first contacted New Terra, stood before the Supreme Crystalline Council in the heart of the Empire. Her form had lost its usual silver radiance, instead pulsing with confused patterns of light that reflected her inner turmoil. Honored ancestors, she projected to the ancient beings who ruled their civilization. I have spent cycles studying the human response to our collection efforts. I believe we have fundamentally misunderstood the nature of their species, the Supreme Harmonizer. A being so old his crystal form had become almost perfectly transparent, pulsed with dismissive energy. They are primitives who choose chaos over order. There is nothing to understand except the need for their correction. But Vethel had spent too much time analyzing human behavior to accept such simple explanations. Honored One, their chaos is not random. It follows patterns we do not recognize because we have forgotten what it means to choose growth over stasis. Then she projected images from the human raids. Not the destruction of the collections, but the careful rescue of preserved specimens.
the gentle revival of extinct species, the tears of joy when children were reunited with their families. They destroyed our most precious works, another council member interjected. How can you find meaning in such vandalism? Because they didn't destroy to cause pain, Vithal replied. They destroyed our prisons to set the prisoners free, and those prisoners chose freedom over our perfect preservation.
The council chamber erupted in discordant harmonics as the implications of her words sank in. For 50,000 years, Zephyrian civilization had been built on the assumption that intelligent beings would choose perfect safety over dangerous freedom.
The human raids had proved that assumption catastrophically wrong. But there were Zephyrians who couldn't accept this new reality. General Zythara represented a faction that saw the human liberation of their collections as not just an attack on their empire, but a fundamental challenge to their way of existence. If we allow this contamination to spread, he argued before the military council, it will destroy everything we have built. Chaos will spread throughout the galaxy like a plague. Order will collapse. Beauty will be lost forever. His proposed solution was as extreme as his fear: the complete extermination of humanity and every species that had chosen freedom over preservation. It would require the deployment of weapons that the Zephyrians had held in reserve for 50,000 years, planet killers capable of sterilizing entire star systems. The purification fleet is ready, he reported. 100,000 vessels armed with crystalline disruptors. We can eliminate the human contamination and any species they have corrupted within a single campaign cycle. But Zythara had made the same mistake that had led to the current crisis. He had underestimated what humans were capable of when their families were threatened. Humanity's intelligence networks, refined over decades of secret preparation, had been tracking Zephyrian military movements since the first raids. Project Lighthouse had evolved beyond simple communication into a galaxy-spanning surveillance system that could monitor fleet movements in real time. They're mobilizing everything, reported Admiral Hayes as he studied the latest intelligence briefings. This isn't just a punitive expedition. They're planning genocide. Elena nodded grimly. Her task force had been expanded into something the galaxy had never seen. A combined fleet representing dozens of species united by shared trauma and common purpose. The Melodians provided sonic weapons that could shatter crystal armor. The Cathera contributed stealth technology that made their ships nearly invisible. Other liberated species offered capabilities that human science was only beginning to understand. Numbers? Elena asked. They outnumber us 10-1, Hayes replied. But that's assuming our allies fight with conventional tactics. Foster, now serving as the Alliance's strategic advisor, smiled grimly. Admiral, every species in this alliance spent millennia thinking about how to escape from Zephyrian preservation systems. They've had a long time to consider the Empire's weaknesses. The revelation that followed changed everything. The liberated species hadn't just been passive prisoners during their captivity, they had been learning, observing, planning. Each species had discovered different vulnerabilities in Zephyrian technology and psychology. Combined, their knowledge created a blueprint for defeating an empire that had never been successfully challenged. They're not really warriors, Dalthara explained during a strategy session. The Crystal Singers have never had to fight a real war because their technology was so superior to everyone else's. But we learned how they think, how they plan, how they react to the unexpected. The Alliance's battle plan was unlike anything in military history. Instead of massive fleet engagements, they would use precision strikes targeting the psychological and technological foundations of Zephyrian power. Crystalline disruptor weapons were useless against enemies who understood their harmonic frequencies. Fleet coordination systems could be paralyzed by beings who had spent millennia studying their communication patterns. But the most devastating weapon in the Alliance arsenal was something the Zephyrians had never encountered. An enemy that fought not for conquest or resources, but for the simple right to choose their own destiny. As the Purification Fleet gathered at the edge of Zephyrian space, preparing to eliminate the contamination of freedom from the galaxy, they faced an opponent that had been preparing for this moment far longer than they realized. The children of New Terra were safe with their families. The liberated species were free to choose their own paths, but the war that had started with 48 kidnapped children was about to determine whether choice itself would survive in the galaxy. The final battle was coming, and both sides understood that only one vision of civilized existence could survive. The battle for the future of galactic civilization began not with grand fleet maneuvers, but with a transmission from a 6-year-old girl on New Terra. Emma Chen, still wearing the pajamas with rocket ships that her mother had bought for her homecoming, stood before the colony's communication array and spoke words that would echo across the galaxy. Dear Crystal people, she began, her small voice carrying the weight of innocence confronting ancient evil. "My name is Emma, and you took me away from my mommy. You said you were keeping me safe, but safe isn't the same as happy. Safe isn't the same as loved." Admiral Elena Vasquez watched the transmission from the bridge of the Retribution, now the flagship of the largest Alliance fleet in galactic history. Beside her, representatives from 43 liberated species monitored their own ship's readiness for the coming battle.
"You showed me pictures of other children in your pretty boxes," Emma continued.
"They look so sad. I want you to let them go home too. If you don't, my mommy and daddy and all our friends are going to make you, because that's what families do. They protect each other." The message was broadcast on every frequency, translated into every known language, sent to every corner of Zephyrian space. It wasn't a military threat or a diplomatic ultimatum. It was something far more dangerous to a civilization that had forgotten the meaning of genuine love. It was a child's simple understanding of right and wrong. General Zythara received the transmission aboard his flagship, the Eternal Harmony, as the Purification Fleet prepared for its final assault on human space. His crystalline form pulsed with colors that hadn't been seen in Zephyrian society for millennia, the deep reds and purples that indicated not just anger, but existential rage. A primitive child thinks to lecture us on the nature of preservation. He projected to his subordinates. This is exactly why such contamination must be eliminated before it spreads further. But other Zephyrians throughout the Empire heard Emma's words differently. Harmonizer Vethal, monitoring communications from the capital world, felt something she had never experienced before. Doubt about the fundamental principles of her civilization. Honored ancestors, she addressed the Supreme Crystalline Council in an emergency session. The child speaks of happiness as distinct from safety, of love as distinct from preservation. Have we considered that these might be separate concepts? The Supreme Harmonizer's response rippled with dismissive certainty. Happiness is temporary. Love is chaotic. Safety and preservation are eternal truths. The child's words prove how corrupted her kind has become. But Vithel had spent too long studying human behavior to dismiss their wisdom so easily. In secret chambers beneath the capital, she began conducting experiments that would have been considered heretical just weeks earlier. She observed Zephyrian younglings in controlled environments, noting how they reacted when given choices versus when everything was decided for them. The results were disturbing to someone raised in a culture of absolute order. Given choices, the younglings showed creativity, problem-solving abilities, and emotional growth that disappeared when every decision was made for them. Chaos, it seemed, was not the opposite of intelligence. It was its catalyst. Meanwhile, the Alliance fleet was preparing for battle using strategies that defied every conventional military doctrine. Instead of massing their forces for a direct assault, they scattered across thousands of systems, each group targeting specific vulnerabilities in Zephyrian infrastructure. Remember, Elena broadcast to all Alliance ships, "We're not here to destroy their civilization. We're here to give them the same choice we gave their preserved specimens. Stay in their crystal cages or embrace the beautiful chaos of freedom." The Melodians had spent weeks composing what they called the Symphony of Liberation, harmonic frequencies that would resonate through Zephyrian crystal technology, not to destroy it, but to reveal its hidden nature to those trapped within it. The Kythera contributed stealth fields that would make Alliance ships appear as ghosts, striking without warning and vanishing before response forces could mobilize. But the most crucial element of the Alliance strategy came from humanity's darkest secret, technologies that had been developed in complete violation of galactic treaties. Weapons designed not for conquest, but for the protection of human families at any cost. Foster stood in the Retribution's war room, surrounded by holographic displays showing the locations of every known Zephyrian collection facility. "Project Pandora is ready for activation," she reported. "Every preserved specimen in the Empire will receive the liberation frequency simultaneously. If our calculations are correct, the psychological impact will be devastating." The technology behind Project Pandora was terrifying in its implications. Humanity had learned to weaponize empathy itself, creating quantum resonance patterns that would allow every imprisoned being to share their experiences with their captors. For the first time in 50,000 years, the Zephyrians would feel what their beneficiaries had felt during millennia of crystalline captivity. "Admiral," Commander Rodriguez reported from his position at Tactical, "the Purification Fleet is moving. 100,000 ships on direct course for human space. They'll reach the outer colonies in 18 hours. Elena nodded grimly. The final phase of the plan required perfect timing. The Alliance would have to engage the Zephyrian fleet while simultaneously liberating every collection in the Empire and transmitting the empathy weapon to the Zephyrian civilian population. "Signal all ships," she ordered. "Operation Freedom Song is commencing now." Across the galaxy, 43 different species launched coordinated strikes against an empire that had ruled through overwhelming technological superiority for longer than human civilization had existed. But they weren't attacking with conventional weapons. They were attacking with ideas. The first liberation frequency hit the Great Archive of Kithara at exactly 1200 Galactic Standard Time. The facility, which housed the preserved consciousness of over 3,000 extinct species, had never experienced anything like the harmonic resonance that suddenly flooded its crystal matrices. Inside their crystalline prisons, beings that had been dormant for millennia began to stir. But more significantly, their emotional experiences, centuries of watching loved ones die while they remained trapped in perfect stasis, began resonating outward through the facility's communication networks. The Zephyrian caretakers, crystalline beings who had spent their entire existence believing they were providing the greatest possible gift to their charges, suddenly experienced what preservation actually felt like from the inside, the crushing despair of watching time pass without agency. The agonizing helplessness of being unable to help when loved ones suffered, the slow death of hope that came from realizing that safety without choice was just another form of extinction. Similar awakenings were occurring at every collection facility throughout the Empire. The Melodian Symphony of Liberation wasn't just freeing prisoners, it was forcing the Zephyrians to confront the true cost of their compassion. General Zythara, leading the purification fleet toward human space, received the first reports with confusion that rapidly became horror. His subordinates were projecting emotional states he had never seen before, the chaotic patterns that indicated what primitive species called guilt, doubt, even despair. "The collections are awakening," reported his aide, the patterns in her crystalline form fluctuating wildly. "The preserved specimens they're sharing their experiences with the caretakers. The caretakers are requesting permission to end their duties." Sithara's form blazed with furious energy. "Maintain course. This is exactly the contamination we must eliminate. Deploy the crystalline disruptors. Begin system sterilization of the nearest human colony." But as the purification fleet prepared to unleash weapons capable of destroying entire star systems, they found themselves facing an enemy that had anticipated their every move. The Alliance fleet didn't meet them in conventional battle formation. Instead, they appeared everywhere at once, striking from impossible angles with weapons that shouldn't have existed. Captain Sarah Martinez, commanding the converted merchant vessel Second Chance, found herself leading a squadron of Kithara stealth ships against a Zephyrian dreadnought that could have destroyed her entire homeworld. But the Kithara had spent 8,000 years studying Zephyrian shield frequencies from inside their crystal cages. "Harmonic resonance at optimal frequency," her Kithara tactical officer reported in perfectly learned English. "Their shields will be transparent to our weapons for exactly 17 seconds. The attack that followed was surgical in its precision. The Alliance didn't destroy the dreadnought, they disabled its weapons and life support, then flooded it with the same empathy frequencies that were awakening consciousness throughout the Empire. The ship's crew, faced with the emotional experiences of their victims for the first time, simply stopped fighting. Similar scenes played out across the battlefield as the Alliance revealed the true scope of humanity's preparation for this war. Every weakness in Zephyrian technology had been catalogued and studied. Every psychological vulnerability had been identified and targeted. Most importantly, every preserved species had contributed knowledge that turned their former captors' greatest strengths into crippling weaknesses. But the most devastating moment came when Project Pandora activated simultaneously across the entire Zephyrian Empire. Harmonizer Vethal was in the middle of her secret experiments when the empathy wave hit Zephyrian Prime. For the first time in her existence, she felt what it was like to be trapped in crystalline perfection, watching life pass by without the ability to participate, to grow, to choose. The experience lasted only seconds in real time, but it contained centuries of accumulated anguish from thousands of preserved beings. Vedal's crystalline form cracked under the emotional overload, but her consciousness remained intact, forever changed by understanding what compassion had cost its recipients. Across the capital world, similar awakenings were occurring. Zephyrians who had spent their entire lives believing in the benevolence of preservation were experiencing their victims' centuries of silent suffering. The psychological foundations of their civilization cracked like their crystalline bodies, under the weight of genuine empathy. The Supreme Harmonizer, ancient beyond measure and crystallized in patterns that had remained unchanged for millennia, felt the accumulated pain of 10,000 extinct species flow through his consciousness. For the first time in 50,000 years, he experienced something that Zephyrian philosophy had declared impossible, the understanding that love without choice was not love at all. His response shocked the galaxy. Instead of ordering increased resistance to the Alliance assault, he transmitted a message that reached every Zephyrian ship, every collection facility, every world in the Empire. End the preservation protocols, his mental voice carried exhaustion deeper than stellar collapse. Open the collections. Let them choose. The effect was instantaneous and catastrophic to the old order. Throughout the Empire, crystalline doors swung open for the first time in millennia. Preserved specimens, some extinct for longer than human civilization had existed, stumbled into freedom they had thought was gone forever. General Sithara, watching his empire dissolve around him, made one final, desperate attempt to preserve the old ways. He ordered the purification fleet to target not human worlds, but the liberated collection sites throughout Zephyrian space. If we cannot preserve order, he projected to his remaining loyal forces, then we will preserve nothing. Better extinction than contamination. But humanity had anticipated even this final atrocity. As Zethara's ships moved to destroy the very beings they had once claimed to protect, they found themselves facing not just the Alliance fleet, but every liberated species fighting for their newly won freedom. The battle that followed would be remembered as the moment when love proved stronger than order, when the chaos of choice triumphed over the perfection of control. The purification fleet, designed to eliminate contamination from the galaxy, instead discovered what it meant to fight enemies who were willing to die for the right to live free. Elena Vasquez, standing on the bridge of the Retribution as the last Zephyrian resistance collapsed around her, thought about Emma Chen and the other children who had started this war simply by being loved too much to abandon. They had been home with their families for weeks now, but their kidnapping had changed the galaxy forever. Admiral, Commander Rodriguez reported, General Sithara is requesting terms for surrender. Elena considered the irony. The general who had planned to eliminate humanity's contamination was now asking for the very thing that had driven the human response from the beginning, compassion for the defeated. Tell him, Elena said finally, that we'll show him the same mercy he showed our children. He can surrender unconditionally, or he can face the consequences of his choices. The Zephyrian general's response was the final proof that the old order was truly dead. I choose surrender. The word choose, from a species that had forgotten what choice meant, marked the end of 50,000 years of crystalline tyranny and the beginning of something unprecedented in galactic history. A civilization where the right to choose one's own destiny was considered more precious than life itself. On New Terra, Emma Chen was playing in the same playground where she had been taken weeks earlier, but now her games included new friends, young beings from a dozen liberated species whose families had come to settle in human space, drawn by the promise of a society that valued freedom over safety. Sarah Chen watched her daughter teaching a young Kithara how to use the monkey bars and smiled through tears she couldn't explain. The galaxy was free, the children were safe, and love had proved stronger than the ancient fear of chaos. But perhaps most importantly, when the Crystal People had asked what families did, humanity had shown them. Families protected each other, no matter the cost, no matter the odds, no matter what they had to become in the process. Love, it turned out, was the most dangerous force in the universe. The Zephyrians had learned that lesson 50,000 years too late.